Okay. It would be to your advantage to have your ID sheet out with all those names in front of it, because there are plenty of names on this deal here. So we'll kind of go from there. Okay, what was the last battle we talked about there, Chantel? And how did that turn out? Who won that? What was the story behind that, etc.? What was the result of the Battle of Chancellorsville? Who did historians consider it was a victory for, but they paid a high price for? Remember that story? Confederates, they considered a Confederate victory, but what was the high price they paid? They lost Stonewall Jackson, who was accidentally shot by his own men, actually shot in the arm. Arm was amputated, which was pretty common for those days, but infection set in from actually a different internal injury, and he ended up dying. So Lee has lost a very important commander, but yet, who's kicked butt in all of these battles so far for the most part? Confederacy. Lee, since he's been commander, has he lost a battle yet? No. So there hasn't been a Union general yet that's been able to handle Lee and his forces. So keep that in mind. Now, after the loss at Chancellorsville, Lincoln changed commanders again. And he changed to Union General George Meade. George Meade. And Meade, it was kind of an interesting story. Meade was stationed in command of other troops, and when he got the word that he was going to be the new overall commander of Union forces, when the guy came, he thought he was being arrested for something. You know, he probably didn't have the best past or whatever, and he thought, what are the charges I'm being charged up for? That maybe he did something wrong as far as the battle goes. And when he was informed that he was going to be the overall commander, at first he wasn't all that thrilled, because no one had been able to compete with Lee yet. You know, and what was the reason why? Why have we had trouble competing with Lee? What are we always, when we get into a battle, what are these generals that they should not be? Old. Well, not old. They're not necessarily old. What's that? No, they're okay there, but what are they lacking? Not experience or strategy, but the ability to be what? Aggressive. Yeah, they're not very aggressive. They're tentative. They're always waiting. They're always apprehensive. And we got to find a commander that's not going to be apprehensive, and Lincoln is really hoping that George Meade will be that person. Now, at the same time that President Lincoln was changing commanders, General Robert E. Lee was marching the Confederate Army toward Pennsylvania, about 75,000 men. So after the Battle of Chancellorsville, while Lincoln is replacing generals again, this time with General George Meade, Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army are marching toward Pennsylvania with about 75,000 men. And what Lee's reasoning, or his strategy for marching a big army towards Pennsylvania, is he wanted to cut off America's capital, which was Washington, D.C., and try to destroy the Union's will to fight, because they're just kind of getting beat at every battle we've had. And Lee believes that if he goes into Pennsylvania and he can win there, he will basically cut off America's capital from the rest of the Union forces, and maybe the Union will just be tired of fighting, and we'll end up with two countries within the United States, one slave, one free. That's kind of what his thought process is. He's going to try to cut off America's capital and destroy the Union's will to fight. Well, after gaining command in June of 1863, General Meade starts to march about 100,000 men on a collision course with the Confederates. So they're marching toward each other. So in June of 1863, after taking overall command of the Union forces, General George Meade begins to march 100,000 Union soldiers, and they're on a collision course with the Confederates. And where do they meet up on July 1st, 1863? At a little small town called Gettysburg. So, in June of 1863, General Meade is marching nearly 100,000 men. Robert E. Lee is marching about 75,000 men. And they're on a collision course, and they're going to make contact just west of a little town in Pennsylvania known as Gettysburg. So my point is they're not just going to go 75,000, 100,000 and meet each other. They're going to meet factions of each other's armies, and it's going to lead to a tremendous battle here. Okay? So on July 1st, 1863, just west of the town of Gettysburg, a small band of Confederate soldiers are stationed. And they're thinking that the Union forces are at least 20 miles away. So again, on July 1st, 1863, just west of the town of Gettysburg, you have a small group of Confederate soldiers stationed there. And these Confederate soldiers think that the Union forces are at least 20 miles away. So as they're sitting there, kind of holding out, waiting for supplies such as new shoes or shoes to arrive, all of a sudden, a group of Union soldiers advance toward them, and we have a skirmish. Okay? So on July 1st, 1863, just west of the town of Gettysburg, a small group of Confederate soldiers are stationed there. They're resting, they're waiting for some supplies, they're even waiting for shoes, because some of them don't have shoes anymore, they're worn out. And all of a sudden, a small group of Union troops advance, and the two begin a skirmish. Okay, what's the difference between a skirmish and a battle? Yeah, just a small conflict, okay? Well, as we're going to find out, within an hour, this skirmish is going to turn into a full-fledged battle, because what arrives from both sides? Reinforcements, okay? So this little small skirmish that starts between two small groups of Confederate and Union soldiers on July 1st, 1863, just west of Gettysburg, within an hour is going to balloon into a full battle as both sides received reinforcements. Now, where is General Lee and the main part of the Confederate Army? They're 8 miles away from this skirmish turned battle. Where is General Meade and the main Union forces? They're 30 miles away. So we do not have the main forces there yet. You've got two small bands on each side that have been reinforced, and the skirmish has turned into a battle. But Lee is still 8 miles away from the conflict, and Meade is 30 miles away from the conflict. Well, finally, at 1 o'clock that afternoon of July 1st, 1863, both sides, Lee's main army and Meade's main army, meet. And the Battle of Gettysburg officially begins at that time. So prior to that, we had a skirmish turned into a battle, but by 1 o'clock p.m. on July 1st, 1863, Lee's Confederate Army has met up with Meade's Union Army, and this is when the Battle of Gettysburg officially begins. Now there's different facets of this thing, and we'll try to explain it to you, and you'll get a chance to see it on video. If you go back to the original skirmish turned battle, right, that one that started, the Confederates were beating back the Union forces, and the Confederates were under the command of General Richard Ewell. General Richard Ewell. Okay, General Richard Ewell. He's commanding the Confederate forces at that skirmish turned battle outside of Gettysburg. Now, as Ewell and the Confederates are beating back Union forces, these Union troops are retreating through Gettysburg toward a ridge known in history as Cemetery Hill. Some people call it Cemetery Ridge, but it's really Cemetery Hill. Okay, so back at the original skirmish turned battle, just a little bit outside of Gettysburg, the Confederates under the command of General Richard Ewell are beating back Union forces, and these Union troops are retreating through the town of Gettysburg toward a ridge known as Cemetery Hill. The reason they're retreating to there is because there's other Union forces there. okay? And they're under the command of a 30-year-old lieutenant by the name of Frank Haskell. So a 30-year-old lieutenant by the name of Frank Haskell, Union lieutenant, is up on Cemetery Hill as the Union troops retreat and Confederate troops advance. And what do you think he's going to do, Haskell, when these guys start heading up Cemetery Hill? He's going to get him out of the retreat mode and get him what? Turned around and facing the enemy. Now this thing had named Cemetery Hill for a reason, because what was up there? The cemetery gravestones. And these guys were actually resting their rifles, the Union, on these gravestones, shooting back at the Confederates as the Union's retreating and the Confederates are advancing. And that's along Cemetery Hill. So Lieutenant Haskell organizes these Union soldiers and he faces them towards the enemy using grave markers to rest their rifles. Now I'm going to do a bad drawing, but you'll see it on the video later. So here is Cemetery Hill, and there's a ridge that goes all along this area. And this is basically a flat farmland area. But this ridge goes for almost 3 miles. And what Union forces do is they station all of their troops, almost 100,000, all in a defensive position along that ridge. That's what they're doing. So the Union forces are placed all across the long ridge. It's nearly 3 miles long, and they're in a defensive position looking down. Okay? Now, Confederate General Lee can see that the Union has an advantage. Don't they have a tactical advantage? They're on what?
High ground.
High ground. And he sees this as a huge advantage for the enemy. So he makes his first decision of the Battle of Gettysburg by trying to take some of this high ground. Anybody want to guess what the high ground he wanted to take right off the bat? Culp's Hill. So at this point, when Lee can clearly see that the Union has a big tactical advantage as they hold the high ground on the rebels, Lee makes the first decision of the Battle of Gettysburg to take Culp's Hill. It's a position on the far north of Union lines, far north. So it would be on which side? This is weird how we're going to do this. This is going to be south, north, west, and east. So Culp's Hill is going to be in this area here, okay? Now why would he want that ridge? What could he do from that ridge that would be pretty important? He could fire what from that ridge? He could fire from here all along the Union defense lines with what? Cannons. Very good. So Lee wants to gain position of Culp's Hill so he can use cannon fire to shoot at Union positions along the ridge. Okay, that's what he wants. Because what's this probably? The highest ground. Okay? That's why I picked it. So he orders General Ewell, remember General Ewell that was kicking butt back at the original skirmish towards Turned Battle? This is what he said, and I want you to write this down. This is the orders that Lee gives. Take that hill if practicable. I gotta make sure I spell this right here. Take that hill if practicable. Okay, that's the order he gives General Ewell. Take that hill, meaning Culp's Hill, if practicable. What's that mean? What's practicable? Look at how, I'll let Chantel look up at her. I know she's got her dictionary because she's on fire today. Look up practicable and tell me what the definition is. Meantime, you think about it. So Lee orders General Ewell to take that hill, meaning Culp's Hill, if practicable. I bet you kind of got an idea.
Feasible?
If feasible. What's feasible mean? Plausible. Is it possible? Okay, so is Lee giving him an order, or is he leaving it up to him? That's the thing to think about. Well, when the order reached General Ewell, he doesn't believe it's possible or practicable, so he chooses not to take the hill. Okay? So, when the order reaches General Ewell, he does not believe he can do it and decides it would not be practicable. That wasn't Lee's intention. Okay? And the reason I want to explain this is Lee was a Virginia gentleman. Okay? Virginia gentlemen don't show a lot of emotion. They don't yell and scream. They don't get mad. And he assumed that Ewell knew what he meant. Even though he asked him kind of, take that hill, please, is kind of what he was thinking. But he said it practical. He didn't assume that Ewell would make a decision that it wasn't practical. It was Lee's assumption that he would understand and attack Culp's Hill. This is going to be a huge mistake at this point for the Confederates by not doing that. So Ewell makes the decision it's not practicable. And that was not what Lee meant. Now, despite the failure to take Culp's Hill on the first day of battle, historians say that the Confederates won the first day. And the morale among Confederate soldiers was very high at the end of the first day. So even though they failed to take Culp's Hill, which would have been pretty important on the first day of battle, historians say the Confederates win the day, and the Confederate soldiers' morale was very high. So, we're going to move to day 2, which would be what? July 2nd, 1863. And Lee is going to continue to go on the offensive. He will never go on the defensive here. His plan is to win here, cut off the American capital, and crush the Union will to fight. He's going to be on the offensive day 2 as well. No retreat. Not even a consideration. So what's going to be the big target on July 2nd, 1863 in Lee's mind? They didn't get the first day. Culp's Hill. So on July 2nd, 1863, Culp's Hill will become a target for the Confederates. So approximately 4,700 rebel troops arrive at the base of Culp's Hill, ready to assault and take command of the hill. So approximately 4,700 rebel troops arrive at the base of Culp's Hill, ready to seize it and take it from the Union. Among those Confederate soldiers is Wesley Culp. Now this Culp's Hill's on what's northern or southern land? It's in Pennsylvania. Where's that? Yeah. Wesley Culp is fighting for the Confederates to try to take his own family's hill, because he moved from Pennsylvania to the south as a young child, and he's been a southerner for some time. Ironically, he's going to be trying to take a hill that belongs to his family that they probably aren't interested in him taking. You see what I'm saying? Like I mentioned, Culp had moved to Virginia as a youth, and he's now fighting to take his own family land. His uncle owned Culp's Hill at the time. So here he is at the bottom of Culp's Hill, going to take land that belongs to his uncle away from him. Okay? Now, as the force of 4,700 Confederates attack Culp's Hill, the Union continues to hold the high ground and still has the advantage. So they're having a battle there at Culp's Hill, and the Union's winning. The Confederates are not having much success. Well, while they're attacking Culp's Hill, Lee decides to take more Confederate soldiers and try to attack another area on the southern part of this ridge called Little Round Top. So as Lee has directed Confederates to try to take Culp's Hill, he turns his attention and takes more Confederate soldiers, and he wants to take Little Round Top, which is on the southern end of the Union line. So he's going to try to take both ends. Does that make sense? Of the Union line. Now in this battle at Little Round Top, approximately 2,000 Confederate soldiers will engage 2,000 Union troops. Again, who has the advantage? The Union, because they're on the high ground, okay? So that's why Lee wants those areas, because he wants to be able to fire cannons from both sides against Union lines on the ridge. Well, this gets to be quite a fight, and the Union ends up holding Little Round Top because of a deadly bayonet charge on the part of the Union. Okay, so what are they fighting? Hand to hand. The Union wins this skirmish battle at Little Round Top because they end up having a bayonet fight. And who's got more bayonets, the South or the North? The North. So the Union holds Little Round Top with a deadly bayonet charge. And if you notice, General Meade's lines are getting attacked from what? Both sides. Okay? Well, this fighting at Little Round Top starts and ends, fairly soon. The fighting at Culp's Hill lasted into the night. And at the end of the night, the Union was still holding the high ground. So after fighting all day long, the Confederates still failed to take Culp's Hill. So we're at the end of the second day at Gettysburg. And the casualties of dead, wounded, or captured are pretty darn high on both sides. Here are the numbers after day 2. So at the end of the second day at Gettysburg, the casualties of dead, wounded, or captured are high on both sides. Union, approximately 14,000 casualties. Confederates, approximately 11,000 casualties after the second day at Gettysburg. Now this would include the what day? Day 1, 2, okay? Kind of interesting story. That night, General Meade calls all of his officers and commanders together at a local farmhouse and has a meeting. Okay, General Meade, Union General Meade, gets all of his officers together at a little farmhouse that night for a meeting. And they discuss how the battle has gone so far